Hey everyone, Reed here at Big Strong Book, here today to do a review on Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley, the one and only. This, as with many things on this channel, again, is a long time coming. I am ashamed to say that I've gone, pretty much a quarter of a century through my life without getting around to reading Frankenstein. It is a story that clearly needs no introduction. I just have to say, in going into this, I love the story of how the story came to be, of how Frankenstein was created. The famous story about Mary and Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, and then another figure whose name escapes me, who ended up creating one of the first modern vampire stories. They were in Lake Geneva for the summer. It was the year without summer because of a volcanic eruption. They were all told to, or it was a challenge to kind of see who could write the best ghost story. And then it evolved into all of these great writers in a writing competition. Just a perfect storm, right time, right place, certainly for Mary Shelley to create one of the startling works of literature. It's just absolutely phenomenal in every sense of the word. And I can say that in full confidence after reading it. It's just fantastic. It's everything that you could possibly want from a novel of the Romantic period, from a Gothic tale. It's just, in every sense of the word, it is perfect. I do want to do a counterpoint, maybe before I get into the review proper here. Ironic, because it is mentioned within the book. The creature mentions it, The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe, a novel that I reviewed on this channel probably about a month ago. One of the eminent novels of the Romantic period, if not a proto-romantic novel, that I did not like in the slightest. In fact, I kind of hated it. And ironically, that novel within Frankenstein is one of the seminal works that really forms the creature's sentiments and attitudes, and draws up with him a desire to be with others, in communion, in community, and in love. That's another big part of it. It is a work that drew him in, whereas to me it kind of it repelled all those notions, and it was it was Goethe's first novel, and in my mind it was a failed attempt, and the extremities with which the novel went to it. Goethe cast these broad strokes, but it just didn't hit the mark quite well. Whereas I believe in Frankenstein, you get the proper inverse. This does that emotional panoramic, but it is in a way that makes total sense. Within Werther, you get a young man kind of beside himself in this love triangle of sorts. In Frankenstein, you get a creator and his creation who are beside themselves. But it makes total sense. You get a man who has created a living, thinking being through these strange, probably illicit means. He creates this creation that then grows not only to resent him, but to resent humanity. Those emotional extremes make complete sense within the lens of the story that Shelley is wanting to tell. Not only that, but then I could go on and on and on with praises about this work. First of all, you get the framing for the story. I knew that this novel, like other romance novels of its era, maybe in direct contrast to something like Jane Austen, even though Jane Austen maybe didn't explicitly write in the romance tradition, I might be wrong on that. Austen kind of, I don't often attribute the word trail or the phrase trailblazer to people, but she certainly kind of went her own path in literature in a very good way. but within this, it is very much so an epistolary novel. It is a novel of letters and of related narratives, meaning like not like tangential relate narratives, but narratives that are told to somebody else. It is constant and to the point where it almost becomes a story within a story within a story. It is that type of necessary push where we get the initial creator Walton, and then we get a further step with Frankenstein, and then we get an even further step with the creature, and it does so in such an impactful way. And of course now we can tie that very closely with Bram Stoker's Dracula, which admittedly I still have not read that all the way through. That is certainly on my list in the near future. But that too, a gothic novel with a horror or frightening bend that is an epistolary novel made up of letters and diary entries for the most part. Within this, we start with Captain Walton kind of forging a trail through the Arctic when he comes across a strange, tall, man-looking thing with a dog sled, and then after that they come across this other poor man that's kind of stranded and all alone, and they take him aboard, and it is none other than Victor Frankenstein, in which Walton himself is, as he's writing to his sister, he writes of almost the need for connection, the need for a friend of sorts, and he finds a very odd companion in Victor Frankenstein. And as Frankenstein then tells this grand narrative of his life, of his interests, and then it is, and then the novel almost kind of blurs the lines a little bit when it comes to the creation itself. I for whatever reason, I mean the creation of the creature in all of the Frankenstein adaptations, pretty much as far as I know, is one of the central set pieces. It is one of the central scenes, and within the novel Frankenstein, it is almost after the fact. It's not entirely clear. It is almost as if Frankenstein, in relating his narrative to Walton, is not necessarily trying to shirk his responsibilities for what he has done, but he is really starting to settle with the consequences of his own actions. And there's a line or a section further on in the narrative, specifically with Justine's trial, in which Justine, and this is, forgive me if I'm going off on a tangent, but when Justine confesses to the murder of William Frankenstein, even though she had not done it, and she knew she had not done it, she knew she was telling a lie in confessing, but because she felt the need to confess something, and where her confessor had kind of been haranguing her, but it was this like almost animalistic need to confess, like a telltale heart, but for the innocent. And Frankenstein, even though in a way he is, I mean, well, therein lies the debate. If he is guilty of creating this life that has these potentials and has these capabilities, but that ultimately goes off on a violent bend, Frankenstein is ultimately responsible for the entire tragedy within not only his life, but also the creature's life. He is. And so it is a man at the end of his time, literally out on the ice, having to come to terms with all of that. And this work was good. It was good, and I was kind of fully on board with what Shelley was going for. This did not reach, I would say, the level of transcendence that it did until it got to the creature's narrative. When we have that shift, it is like the clouds part, the sun comes down, and we get just full majesty and splendor. When the creature creates a hovel and he's by this cottage, and this cottage has, if I remember the names correctly, Felix, siblings Felix and Agatha, and this old man, this father, this old man who if I remember correctly, he is blind, but he has this guitar and he plays this music and it draws the creature in. And the creature is drawn in by love and by desire and certainly by virtue. That is what the creature almost makes clear when, at a certain point in the narrative, when Frankenstein catches up to him, within the Alps, it seems, as he's like traversing Mont Blanc. And the creature learns of sorrow and learns of love and learns of pain. And when he tries to approach the old man who, again, and if I am correct in remembering that this old man was blind, even more perfect, that the blind old man is able to accept the creature, but then when the others return home who can see the creature, they kind of pounce upon him and throw him away, as I suppose any one of us would do if we were confronted with an 8-foot tall, terrifying creature. We would assume it to be an abomination and we would toss it away. But it is when that creature is then bereft of connection, and specifically when he saves a young girl almost from drowning, and that it is the response of her father or her caretaker or whomever to then set upon the creature and attack him, that then he becomes hell-bent, where he realizes that he's not some sort of Adam, but he's almost Lucifer, this type of fallen angel who grows in resentment to the Creator, and commits himself to committing great evil, intentional evil. He closes the door of his mind completely towards love, towards compassion, but he says to Frankenstein, create a bride. Create somebody for me who is almost as much of an abomination as me. And like I can be virtuous again. And so Frankenstein starts to set about doing this, but he can't bring himself to do this. He can't ease the conscience and ease the path of his creature, his abomination of sorts, by creating another one. And so he destroys it. And then, Adam does not get his Eve, so to speak. And commits himself to ensuring that Frankenstein's life will be a living hell. He kills his friend Clerval. He kills Elizabeth on her and Frankenstein's, after their wedding. And it is then in that moment when Frankenstein is then so hell-bent and just out of his mind. He's a man of science, of learning, but is almost in a way, I think, too, this is almost a cautionary tale of the creative mind. You could draw modern day analogies to something like a developer or whoever creating like an artificial intelligence system that becomes self-aware, and that that's too easy of a comparison, but it is kind of a relevant one, I think. Ultimately, I think Mary Shelley just had this great, horrifying idea, and it was just that, but it is with, the great works of literature transcend their own time. Not that we can take them and force them onto, a lens of today. But this is a book that is, because it is universal in that sense of a creator and the created, it can speak to all for all time. It is in that very essence a timeless work. But anyway, where I was with Frankenstein then committing himself and preparing to follow Frankenstein to the ends of the earth, or excuse me, follow the Frankenstein following the creature to the ends of the earth. And then with Frankenstein concluding his narrative and then just kind of shutting down and passing away. And then the creature almost mourning the death and preparing to kill himself on the northernmost point of the world, or whatever he says, like an ash, find him on an ashen pyre, or whatever the exact line is. And he leaves Walton's ship. You know, he doesn't want to live. It's as if he has seen it all, and the creature knows that he will perpetually be an abomination. It's just brilliant. But again, with the flourishes that Mary Shelley takes, with the narrative structure, with the penetrating glance of creator and created, the vistas that she is able to paint within the words on the page, and then within the theater of the mind, it's stunning. Even over 200 years later, it is still absolutely stunning. It is one of the all-time greats, and I feel privileged to have read it. I really do. I'm kind of glad I was not assigned this in high school, because I think, I wouldn't have appreciated it. Because I get, a bunch of 14 or 15-year-olds reading this book, especially if they're being forced to read it, that could clash well. And, I'm all for introducing students and everything to great works of literature, but maybe there's a way to draw them into it, or maybe Frankenstein works well for high schoolers. It's just, there are many horror texts, horror stories that can be quite one note. And I find often nowadays, especially whether modern day horror novels, we fall into this trap. And even many modern day horror films, I'm talking mainly Blumhouse productions, and don't hate me if you love Blumhouse movies, but it almost falls into that trap of just the visceral thrills, but then great horror really stems and comes alive, no pun intended, I guess, from the Gothic mode. But it's the Gothic mode that also is linked to the Romantic tradition. And I'm not saying that, like, horror, and Frankenstein isn't even really a horror novel. It is the classical horror story, probably because of the Universal films and the Boris Karloff films and all of that, and when Boris Karloff played the creature. And so Frankenstein has taken that place within the broader culture, or the broader cultural mind. But Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's work, it is just the perfect intersection of all of those things, I think, from which horror emerges. It's just wonderful. There are other, I think, Gothic works that I do want to get to, Hoffman and Radcliffe, and maybe Lewis too, things like that, authors like that. Bram Stoker's Dracula, obviously, that's another one. Maybe staying within the Romantic tradition a little bit with, like, Walter Scott, even though he wrote historical romances, not necessarily. Again, horror is, I think, a more loosey-goosey term when it comes to Frankenstein. It is a resultant horror in that horror is the end result. It is not the nature of the world. It is horror that results from the world. Um, but I think horror, when at its best, it can really tap into those kinds of true fear. I mean, I love, the early Ari Aster films like Hereditary and Midsummer, and that's kind of my horror likes and enjoyments. That more kind of visceral things that aren't afraid to take risks. But yeah, we'll see kind of where this path, if in the near future. I mean, I do intend to read more and more Gothic fiction, so I'm excited to see where that goes. So yeah, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. If you have read it, let me know what you think, and as always, I will see you guys next time.